Hello.
Hello.
Hi.
Hey everybody!
Hello.
What's up, y'all?
Well, hi there.
This is the tail end of RTX.
Yeah.
Pretty much.
We're like the last main event.
So we're kind of the closing act.
We're gonna finish strong. Hardcore?
You're here with us, and we appreciate it, and y'all are awesome. But at the same time, it's Sunday of RTX, which means it's almost over.
My feet are incredibly happy, but my heart is incredibly sad.
My mind's telling me no, but my body's telling me yes.
Well, I would say your heart's more important for your overall survival. I mean, your feet are nice. I mean, and they get you around, but without the heart, I don't know.
Yeah. If Anakin Skywalker has taught me anything, it's you can survive as a torso.
We're supposed to talk about something?
Yeah, we're
As long as
podcast
you have a
man.
torso and a mouth, you're still an effective zombie.
All right, so everyone, welcome to the Art of Podcasting panel. Thank you for sticking it out to the very end to wait to be here. We're really happy that you're here. Quick raise of hands. Who here actually does a podcast currently? Wow, that is quite a bit of you. That's pretty cool. Who is thinking about well, all of us up here, of course. Who currently is looking into doing a podcast but doesn't currently do one? All right.
Nice.
So that's what I have. Who hasn't done podcasting at all, doesn't care, and just here to really see what's going on?
Yes.
Okay. A few people?
Lies. That man
A
is
few
lying.
people? All right, cool. So we got a good mix of
You
audience.
sit back and enjoy these next hours. Chill.
These next hours.
No, we're gonna keep talking.
As in typical podcast fashion, I cannot account for any tangents we may or may not take, so be ready for anything, especially with the group that we have up here. So, introductions first. For those who do not know, I am Duststorm, Dustin Pettigrew. I run a podcast called Podtacular. It is a weekly Halo podcast that covers all Halo content.
That's also another lie. It is not weekly. It's like 3 times a week. That's how you get to 350 million podcasts.
It's not that many.
Okay, fine, 350.
Hey, when you got the itch, you gotta scratch it. I understand.
You scratch it a lot.
Sometimes you gotta podcast.
As you can see, it's going to be hectic. To my immediate left is Lindsay Cody from Rooster Teeth.
You don't have box.
She is the former head producer and audio producer for the Rooster Teeth podcast and The Patch. Next to her is Kelly Dunlap, aka Goose Checka from Griffball Hub. Just like next.
Tell the audience.
She is the community manager for Griffball Hub and the host of the Griffball Hubcast.
Anybody listen to the Griffball Hubcast? 3 people?
3 people out of the
I
world.
count
Really?
as at least 2.
Do you really listen to it?
Yep.
Really?
Yeah.
Why?
And of course, all the way at the end, we have Jonathan Cerna, aka Roadblock, from Glipshark, aka, or what used to be known as Late Night Jing and Jam,
Late Night Jig and Jim. And the podcast.
and Noidcast.
Podcast.
Of course, he's the master and producer for Glipshark.
Hi.
So, of course, everyone's here kind of wondering, why podcast? Why even bother with doing podcasting in the first place?
You know, I have that question a lot of times when I'm sitting down editing. I ask that question to myself a lot. Why?
Yeah, why?
Usually for me, when it's a live feedback, I'm like, whoa, someone's gain was put way too high, or someone hopped out their XLR in the middle of a sentence. Sweet.
So, of course, podcasting, you could come from a different variety of different areas, whether it be professionally, whether it be as a fan, but you usually do a podcast because you have a certain set of ideals that you want to share with somebody, or you are part of a community and you feel that your opinions may be valued by other community members. So having a common interest, wanting to be able to collect and share ideas of a similar topic, genre, whatever you want to take a podcast for. If you're doing it from a professional scene, like Nancy here, you may want to be promoting a brand or service. So for Lindsay's
Our
case, it would be
service is
Rooster
dick
Teeth.
jokes that Rooster Teeth.
Science.
Yeah.
For Goose Check, it would obviously be Griffball. For me, it's Halo. For Jonathan, it's the RT community. So
Stuff and things.
stuff and
Yeah.
things, random things. And of course, if you happen to be a subject matter expert, if you're deemed by peers within your collaborative group as a subject matter expert, you might want to do a podcast to help kind of share knowledge around the community at large.
Or you can do all three.
I mean, that's kind of why we branched off into the passion. I know we talked about that before, but obviously we got a lot of audience members that were just focused on our gaming-related topics. And we got a blend, obviously, in Rooster Teeth. You go anywhere, again, from dicks to science to gaming. But we had a big call for a lot of audience members that were like, oh, we like episodes where you just focus on gaming, so we decided to make that its own independent podcast. Now we have the patch.
Yeah. And we'll get into why doing 2 different podcasts might be important.
Yeah.
So let's start with some of the basics. Let's kind of hit the high points off the start. So getting started. The 5 W's and the H is kind of a good mantra to go off of whenever you're trying to figure out how to do something, why you want to do something. So the who. The who of your podcast would be your audience. Who do you want to talk to? Who is the target demographic or group of people you're trying to get information out for, be a collective or collaborative source for information? The what is finding out what you want to talk about, where is the niche that you want to fill. If there's a certain void of content that you think a podcast might fill, where is that, and kind of expand on that opportunity. When, be regular, and I know Goose is looking over at me glaring right now with how many podcasts on some weeks we come out with.
Yes, regular schedules.
We do a podcast on Thursdays.
Oh, I know,
weekly.
it's right before
So we
our
do have a
podcast.
regularly scheduled show, we just do extra shows.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
It was very regular, it's just sometimes more regular than you think it might be.
Yeah.
I mean, some of
I'll
us
admit
do
to
it
it.
once a week, okay?
It's
Not
assisted
everybody.
regularity. It's regularity with a little bit of help, like Bible.
I was going to ask too, as far as like adding extra podcasts that you're talking about. I know you guys have a weekly schedule, but in adding, do you do that because there's an audience response and they're like, hey, we'd like you to do more, or there's a subject that comes up, or is it just like whenever we feel like it?
With the podcast, what we started doing is way back in the day when J&J first started, like the way we did it, we could schedule a call and we could end the recording, but we couldn't end the broadcast because as long as someone was connected to the call, the broadcast was going to continue. So that kind of evolved into people just talking about random stuff. And then Jeff and Barb really kind of took over that area for a while, that like 30 minutes right after the show. When we decided to kind of reinvent the show and do things more live and with a slightly different way of doing it, which we'll get to in a sec, we were like, well, we kind of still want to do the podcast because we wanted to keep the show focused on whatever we were talking about, be that a guest or be that a topic. And the podcast, we were just kind of like, so how are you doing this week? Oh yeah, that's great. Yay, butts. So, and that's the reason why we've kind of done that. And sometimes there'll be a night where I'm like, guys, I just can't do a podcast. I'm sorry. Good night. But there'll be other times where I'll want to chat with people, and that's a really good way to do that. So it's kind of like our laser, well, not laser, but our focus show is our main show, and then the podcast is just kind of something extra.
As long as you have something that's kind of consistent, though, that's what a lot of people really attract to, just making sure that there's a consistent schedule and you have predictable content that's coming out.
Well, I know for us, one of the big things when the Hubcast first started, we're talking, a couple of years ago, the people running it, they would record it, and then it would take like a week for the content to come out. And then by then everything's old news and everybody already knows. And then maybe we would record in 2 weeks, and then maybe we would record in a week and a half. And
Right.
people just didn't know to expect it. And now that we've been doing every week for the past 3 years, every single Thursday night for the past 3 years, we have people that show up, we have people that participate. We have, amazingly enough for Griffball, which is such a tiny little audience, we get thousands of downloads. Please don't say anything.
I was gonna, okay, serious. I was like, yes,
I
so
thought you were
on.
gonna snicker like,
No, what?
yeah,
All friends here. All friends here.
It's chill.
we get that in our spam filter. No, but that's been incredibly helpful for our podcast, is that people come to expect it. Like, we didn't do one this Thursday, and the hate mail that came in, I can't even, where did it go? It'll be back next week. So that's the only downside to having something regular, is that when you miss it,
People
get,
notice.
they get a little angry. But I think of it as passionate. They're very passionate about what we're doing, and
They're caring fans.
the fact that they realized it wasn't there makes me feel all warm and fuzzy inside.
Better that than not noticing that it's not there.
Oh wait, you were gone to RTX every day? We didn't even notice you weren't here.
Yeah, and we had the similar scheduling. Obviously, you were saying repetitive and making sure that you are there available for your audience. I mean, the biggest thing is the live stream. We depend on that, obviously, and that's why we've kept our time the way it is, because a lot of our West Coast audience and Central audience is when they tune in at 7:30 Central Standard Time. So we've set up that we are going to be there, and obviously with the podcast before we went to live streams on Tuesdays, Mondays we would record, and then Tuesdays we have the podcast come out. So, everyone can expect that even though it's a little bit later than the day, depending on what work we have, obviously we're busy people, but that day there will be an episode of the podcast. So people come back.
All right, so the next W on the list is where. So this is depending on where you want to publish your content, whether it be via a blog or a website, or for certain special situations, whether you might want to have someone pay for the podcast if it's a real professional tutorial type thing, but we're not about that kind of stuff here. We're all about community
People will
sharing.
pay for me to podcast? I could get paid to do that?
Depending on what you're talking about, yes.
Anybody want to pay for Griffball? Do you have any Griffball philanthropists in the?
I'll take 8.
Give me those two.
8
you guys.
episodes, that's it. That's
Well, I saw the guy with the grip ball. If he can afford that, I could have that. You know, I was looking at me like, no, it wasn't me. No eye contact.
Sponsor me with the change in your pocket right now.
Yeah.
Do it.
All right, the next W is why. So why is it that you specifically want to do a podcast? What's the motivation behind you wanting to feel some kind of way, wanting to put your opinions out there?
Because I'm right. Why are people laughing? I don't get it. I mean, that's right.
Pick up the mic, drop it again. Right.
Leave the room. I'm out.
You usually want to be open-minded when you have an audience and they give feedback, which we'll get into a little bit.
But I'm right.
We'll get into that.
For some reason, I just thought of the word inexorable. I don't know.
That's a pretty big word.
I love that
If
word.
you could define it for me, that would help me a
It
little bit.
means unstoppable.
Can I have the language of origin, please, and can you use it in a sentence?
Okay, back to the podcast.
We tried tangent.
Yes. And of course, the last W, or for the 5 W's and H, is the how. The hardware and software that goes into recording, producing, and publishing your content. So now is the point where we really dive into the deeper stuff. Not quite as deep, but some of the more specifics of podcasting. So one of the biggest things, if not the biggest thing when it comes to podcasting, is the interest that people will have in your content. Finding a niche where your podcast will actually thrive. So there's plenty of podcasts out there. There's tons of different Halo podcasts. There's tons of different podcasts about politics, news, other sources of media, games, videos, and all that stuff. But what you want to do is, if you're starting out with a podcast, you want to find somewhere where a podcast will fill a void in a certain community or content gap. So for the Griffball Hub, they specifically focus on Griffball. So having a podcast that kind of supplements that, follows their league, is something that really shines on them.
We are the only Griffball podcast. You want to talk about finding your niche? We cornered that market.
Yeah, you're already monopolized.
Yeah, well, yeah, there's nothing wrong with monopoly. It's a perfectly valid strategy as long as the government's not listening.
It's a pretty long game, though.
Yeah. Only if you played it the wrong way. Did you know you're only supposed to go around the board once?
No.
And then you start auctioning off all the properties?
It's my fucking mind.
I thought there was one way to play. I thought there were multiple ways to
Well,
play.
no, in the instructions, that's how they want it, but they realized that children were crying because they didn't get to actually buy all their properties, and so parents were like, oh, well, you just roll it out and around.
You're learning the sadness of real estate early on in life.
I think that's important. But no, obviously about finding your niche, that is so incredibly important. You know, whatever you like, whether it's red versus blue, whether it's Halo, whatever it is, you know, knitting. Why would I want to listen to your podcast? What do you bring to the table that would be of interest to me? You know, for Griffball, like I said, we've got a monopoly. So if you want to listen to a Griffball podcast, I don't know why anybody would, but there's one-stop shop. But for like Duststorm here, there are literally hundreds of Halo podcasts. So why listen to his is he tends to have really cool guests like me. So, you know, and
One among many, I might add.
well, yeah, but they're not here, so.
No, they're not.
But, so that's one thing. And I mean, if you've got a built-in community like Rooster Teeth does, I mean, they listen because, you know, they love the people and we love sharing those stories. So hearing about the squirrel in Gus's mailbox is hysterical and I laugh every time. I mean, that's the funniest thing ever, that he's harassed by a squirrel. You know, and so if you've got a podcast and you've got ideas and thoughts to share, just find a way to deliver it in a way that's unique, that nobody else is doing. Maybe say it in a Scottish accent, I don't know. But have something on it that makes it unique and makes it your own, so that way people will have a reason to listen to you rather than everybody else.
And I think going off that a lot of it, and you kind of touched on it a little bit, but obviously personality plays a part. You can talk about the same subject material, but you know, people tune into the Receive podcast to see Gus getting mad about something. It could be the same subject as another podcast spoke about, but it's Gus. So a lot of it's being yourself too and bringing that personality to the table and what you have to offer individually, and what your sense of humor is and what your style of speaking is. And, you know, obviously I speak really quietly too, so on podcasts I sound like this, but, you know, people like that, so.
It's a nice counter to Gus, who's
Yeah, very loud and angry.
screaming into the mic.
Jonathan, you want to add anything to that while we're kind of just chatting over you?
Oh God, I'm on the spot.
You're the only one
Yeah.
not comment yet.
You're not helping. I mean, one of the things that is really hard, at least that I've found, is trying to include as many people as you can, but keep it together. And I think we're going to touch on that for a second. And I've always found that one of the nice things about our show is that it was Jack originally doing Late Night Jenga Jam, Jenga Ship, and then he had Lauren to add the, hey, what's going on in the geek world? And it was everything from, hey, this video game is coming out, to, oh, hey, did you know that they found that rubber is actually a metal, or something stupid or sciencey like that.
Like playing Monopoly the right way?
Like playing the Monopoly the right way, exactly. And then they brought me on. I'm really not sure why, but I'm on the show now. And I think the three of us make a really, really good team. So that's what's kind of kept us going, is the three of us just kind of working for each other. And it's been a lot of fun. That's why I keep doing it, is because I have a blast every single week hanging out with those guys.
Next thing kind of up there is methods of presentation. So there's two different ways you can really go about doing this. One is topical, where you're specifically focusing on one specific area, or free form. So I think for the Griffball Hubcast and for Podtacular, those are more topical. They specifically focus on a certain area or a certain topic within a community.
Have you listened to the Hubcast?
Yeah, you mostly talk about Griffball, mostly.
Is mostly like
Mostly.
51%?
Yeah.
That's technically
Slightly
most.
more than half.
that's-
Okay, I guess if we're going like 51-49, then I guess we mostly talk about Griffball, but.
And then of
we'll talk about
course,
the tangents.
freeform, which is more of the Rooster Teeth and Blue Shark style, where we talk about anything that decides to come up on the show.
Right. I mean, and when we have a guest, like when we had Jack on, it was still Jenga Jam, but we had him on and we talked. I don't think we talked about video games at all. All we talked about was football. And after the show, he was like, "Man, this was awesome," because normally people ask me about video games. Don't get me wrong, he loves talking about video games because, well, they kind of pay his bills. But he really liked the chance to talk about Texas football, talk about the Cowboys a little bit, just talk about kind of sports in general. And that's when we bring a guest on. Yeah, it's great if we can talk to that guest about whatever they're known for, but we're really just interested in the conversation. Like if we have Nico from Trocadero on, yeah, we're going to talk to him about his music a bit, but we're also going to ask him, so when was the last time you had a crepe you surrendered Surrender Monkey? Because he's French and he's awesome.
Did you just say surrender?
No, I didn't.
So I thought you were saying sir as in,
I-
like under, and I wasn't quite sure what we were getting
Goose,
at.
I've been drinking for like 3 days.
What have you been drinking for 3 days?
I don't know. Whatever I've been drinking for, I don't care.
Bleach.
That red there looks like the blood of my enemies.
The double Cuervo at the stage the other night was a bad idea. We'll leave it at that.
Another thing that's important is maintaining flow. So making sure that whatever you're talking, whatever you're discussing, you kind of keep on topic. You make sure that the content is interesting. It maintains the focus of the audience that you're trying to target. And of course, tangents are one of those things that just happens. And of course, you've seen all the tangents that we've had so far, and I'm sure that ones coming are going to be bountiful.
You haven't seen anything yet, Dustin.
No, I'm well prepared for a massive tangents that's coming or is kind of way off. So maintaining flows is another big point. The good and bad tangents, of course, small, quick little tangents are pretty good. Bad tangents are ones that completely deviate from your main line of content. Something that will take you off for about 5 or more minutes that people that listen to you just aren't interested in at all. So it's kind of hard to do that for shows such as the Rooster Teeth Podcast and Blue Shark, but for podcasts like myself and sometimes the Hubcast.
I was gonna say, I mean, it can, going off, we talked about personality as well and how people are interested in hearing what, I think it's interesting, tangents aside. when people get a chance to talk about their personalities as well, and people like that. And that kind of plays into a lot of the tangents on Rooster Teeth, is people end up telling personal stories. And even though we are freeform, we usually have a list of subjects that we're going to talk about, like a video game release or a video that we put out or some event that's happening. And we do stray from those, and people love it. People love when we go on like a 15-minute tangent again about like Gavin's dick and what happened to it this weekend.
I don't think anybody loves that.
Oh man, they're all, you haven't seen the tweets.
I hide. No spoilers.
Yeah, but there are instances where that's fantastic and great for comedy, and people love that. But then there's other instances that we've had many times where we're like, okay, let's wrap up this story, or like, it usually happens when people decide that they're going to take over the story and make it about that story for the next 30 minutes, and it's not really about interacting anymore, it's about this person telling what they want to tell. So as long as you keep the interactivity, and I don't know, keep it about personality, not so much about, hey, I'm talking right now, everyone shut up and listen, I think tangents are okay, yeah.
As far as like more topical podcasts, from the research I've done, from what I've seen, a lot of things that you're really looking just for content specifically to that topic. It's important to try to at least stay somewhat close to the topic. It's nice to go on tangents a little bit because it keeps the show a little fresh. It doesn't make it stale or anything, but big tangents that really go off what you're normally talking about on the podcast is something that can actually deter audiences away. And I've seen that from trends sometimes on our podcast when we go through, talk about some things and people are like, we want you to talk about this more, and we've seen dips in certain areas.
Well, I know just from experience from listening to podcasts, I'm sure we can all think about times when we've heard a podcast and we're like, oh my God, won't they move on, or won't they please just stop, or, I mean, not picking on Lindsay here, but I remember a couple of Rooster Teeth podcasts, they had interviews afterwards with developers. I think, was BioWare one of them?
Yeah, we have BioWare.
And that's something that's so beyond my interest level. I stopped the podcast. Obviously, I still subscribe and I still listen.
Cool.
To be out there. But that's an example of something that's so outside of my interest level that I actually stopped listening to
And
it.
it's actually funny you bring that up. That is another inspiration for why we had the patch in general. A lot of our guest podcasts, it seems like a lot of people were really turned off by, one, the additional cast member they're not familiar with. It's not Rooster Teeth, but still someone they know online, but that's a whole different dynamic. It's a person being thrown into a group where normally these people have known each other for years or months or worked together, and it's just a little bit of a different feel. And because they're guests, obviously we're going to focus on what they make, or in the case of BioWare, we're going to focus on the games they produced. And a lot of our guests were game producers and game developers. So that's, again, why we started the patch, because people were like, oh, why don't we just have a whole podcast about gaming if you're going to talk about it the whole time?
Yep.
That's a way that something that might not be the best thing right off the bat, you know, because it turns people off, is the way how you can kind of just maneuver it into something else that's good. So,
And the patch is doing great, so yeah.
So that pretty much covers most of the things. One last thing on this is content always trumps production. You could have a crappy podcast with crappy audio quality, but more times the content that you come out with, if it's good content, people really like the opinions that you have, like the stuff that you're talking about, they're going to come back and listen regardless of how bad it may sound. Granted,
to an
having
extent.
yeah, granted,
With
having a well-produced podcast does help quite a bit, and it helps keeps those niche customers or listeners that you may be looking for. But the bulk of your audience, they're going to really be focusing on the content that you put out for your podcast.
For example, on Hubcast, we have one of our regulars, his name is Rally Fox, and he was on the West Coast, and we're on the East Coast, so our podcasting time is his dinner time. So you can routinely hear him eating on the podcast, which is not my favorite thing, and it's sometimes
Which is a
very-
no, by the way.
Yeah, I would discourage that, but we've actually, again, taken something that people didn't like and we turned it into a game, and we now have Guess What Rally's Eating. So people will actually try and guess what he has. So, again, trying to take it, don't eat on the podcast, please, Rally, stop, I'm watching you. But yeah, stuff like that, and for our podcast, we, again, you know, Cal and I, or two of them, we live in the same place. We've got someone in New York, we've got someone in Texas, and we've got someone in California. So it's all done over Skype and streamed on Twitch. And most of them have external microphones like on our Macs, which is like little
Right.
stand-up ones that we bought for $5. So the audio quality is not the best, it could be better, but the thing is we still have people come back and they enjoy it because of the content that we're putting out, not because we have like a $300 Yeti mic dust
It's not
door.
300.
The thing is like, it's big.
It's big, yes. We'll get to that though.
Up for master control. Going off that too, I mean, I've been asked to talk mostly about Rooster Teeth, but going on, just internet box related too. I mean, people started liking that content as well. I remember when Barbara used to Skype in and she was on her phone, and that's how she recorded the podcast. I'm like, oh, okay, phone quality, cool. Or like some cheap computer mic like we talked about, but people like it. And even though it wasn't the best of quality, especially compared to now, I work with Rooster Teeth, and there's obviously a lot of money put into the equipment. I'm like, oh, this is so awesome. But you know, people still liked it regardless.
Yeah, she's gonna nerd out in about 3 slides, just to warn you guys.
I am sorry. Talk a lot about tech.
Prepare yourselves.
So the second biggest thing in my book of podcasting is engaging the community. I think all of us will agree here that community is a big part of why we podcast in the first place, why we continue to do the podcast, and why podcasting is kind of important is because of the community that supports it. So, of course, you need to integrate with your community. You need to be able to bring community assets into your show and a variety of different things. This could be covering community content that if you have the forums or if you have people that comment on your show, bringing those in, talking about those submissions or comments that are on the show. Reach out to the community, have people actually come on the show, have guests on the show. I think everyone here has had a guest at some point on their respective podcasts. And reaching out to, depending on where your podcast lies, celebrities within your community, other community leaders. So for myself, reaching out to everyone else was a community outreach that, if you're doing a podcast, would be something that is highly advised, because it also gets your name out there.
And that, speaking of names, for smaller podcasts like mine, name dropping is highly encouraged. For example, if I say, hey, you know, I was looking over Nuclear Taco 42's new grip ball map and it looks great, and word gets around the Nuclear Taco 42's name was dropped on the podcast, guess who's going to go listen to the podcast? Nuclear Taco 42. For example, I'd never even heard of Internet Box. I don't know how I'd missed it, but a friend tweeted at me and said, hey Goose, your name was dropped on the Internet Box podcast. Oh my
I was
god.
going to say we talked about you actually.
Yeah, and so I downloaded it and now I listen to it. So name dropping in that way, not like, well, I sat next to Lindsay at the panel, so you know, I'm like,
sorry.
that kind of name dropping, not so much, but being able to shout out to your community as much as possible is a great way to get new people to listen to your podcast, or at least try it out. Because let's face it, everybody likes hearing their own name said. There's nothing wrong with it. I have a master's in clinical psychology. I promise it's not narcissistic. You're okay. It's normal.
It's too late, she's already in your head.
In that same sense too, I mean, it's rewarding for fans. I mean, we always, my brain is gone. We have intros for Rooster Teeth podcast whenever we were just audio, and now we put them at the end of our live streams, but those are fan submitted, so now they get to see themselves in the credits, or we would mention them in our journal entries, like, hey, thank you so much for the submission. And I've received messages personally, they're like, oh, thank you so much, awesome, my friends, they listened to it, they listened to my intro, that's awesome. They didn't really care about it before, but since I was in this episode, they wanted to see it, and now they watch too. I was like, oh, that's awesome. So it's a nice reward as well, to reward your fans in a way by mentioning them, because you're like, hey, check it out. We know that you're listening, thanks.
And as far as community outreach, one of the very first times I was doing a convention, I was at PAX, and Allison Stroll from Fake Birth Ray was there. She's one of the main people at the studio that makes Halo, which is a total fangirl moment for me. And I was so nervous to talk to her, and so I wanted to ask her some questions about Griffball, of course. And I was like, can I ask you something? She was like, oh yeah, I mean, nothing asked, nothing gained. So basically, if there is someone in your community that you think, I don't say is on a higher level than you, but someone that you maybe look up to, just reach out to them. I mean, on podcasting, this is a relatively new thing. There's nobody here. I mean, even Major Nelson likes to write back and say things, and he's like,
He's really responsive.
very responsive. So, I mean, you might want to start a little smaller, build up a little bit of an audience, but don't ever be afraid to reach out to somebody. The worst they can do is say, I'm sorry, I can't right now, the time doesn't work. But otherwise, you're going to end up with people on your podcast, like Jeff Storm, or you'll have a panel like this with all of us, or, again, not being narcissistic, just as an example. So yeah, I'd encourage everybody, reach out. It does never hurts. Everybody likes to be asked, hey, do you want to be on my podcast? Well, at least for me, that makes me really excited to do that.
And if you start putting your name out there, you're going to have other communities also notice you and start asking you to be on their show.
Mm-hmm.
If your opinions are valued, and if you have a large listener base, you're going to have people telling other people, hey, go check out this podcast, and eventually it goes up the chain, and then your podcast explodes.
Oh, you know what, the name thing, like, you know, when we heard, not that we already don't listen to the Rooster Teeth podcast, but we heard them drop the name Griffball Hub, our site, when they were listing their vendors. Every single person in my community got an email from me saying, go listen to the Rooster Teeth podcast from mentioned. And well, not everybody, all the good kids did. And so people that didn't even listen to the podcast before maybe were now aware of it. So it's just a great way to hook the community by reaching out, by sharing, and by name dropping as much as you can.
And that's not going to be something that just happens if you don't do it. You have to put some amount of effort into publishing your podcast, making sure that you promote it in certain areas. And there's kind of right and wrong ways to do it. I'm not going to go too much into details here because there's lots of other things we need to talk about. But trying just submitting your show as a news item to community sites, like I know for Halo, HBO is a good place to do it. But there's definitely websites out there for a lot of different communities that you'll probably, if you're doing a podcast or willing to do a podcast, kind of fit the topical areas that you're looking at, and we'll take user submitted content and we'll promote the heck out of it for you. A lot of these bigger organizations really like to see community efforts, and when they see something thrive, when they see passionate people, they will bump that up and they will promote the heck out of it.
Or even something just as simple as a tweet, like, hey, would you mind retweeting this for me? There's actually a book out, and it's like the science of Twitter and how to increase your followers. Not that I've read it or anything, but I'm
just
trying
heard
to
about
increase
it
my
passing.
My Twitter account is @GooseChecka, by the way, just in case anybody wants it. And GOO.
Here we go. It's on the first slide. It's on the first slide.
I don't. What was I talking about?
It's
I got
right
really
up there.
excited. But yeah, just asking for like a retweet. 'Cause I know people will post and I'm like, oh, that's kind of interesting. And then some people will ask, hey, @GooseChecker, hey, @GriffBall Hub, I made this thing. Could you please retweet? Almost instant retweet button. I'll make sure it's not, horribly offensive or, supporting the New England Patriots or something before I do it. But, I'll almost, if you ask for a retweet, I would say 9 times out of 10, you're probably gonna get it. But if you don't ask for the retweet, much, much less retweetage happens.
And the worst thing that can happen, if you do ask for it, it just doesn't get done, which it's.
It doesn't hurt you, because...
No, it doesn't hurt you. And the only thing that you can get from it is a beneficial gain. Last thing on the slide before we move on is, once you have an established podcast, or if you're doing a new podcast and you want to enter this realm, be careful if you do, but is live streaming. And that gives a whole new element to doing
It's
a
a whole
podcast.
nother ballgame now,
It's a whole
shit.
nother ballgame. You have live audience interaction, you have people that can come in and provide you live content for your podcast, something that really is kind of an innovative thing now, and it's still pretty young as live streaming for podcasts, even if it's just audio. Doing something just as special as that, and then doing live giveaways sometimes is a big attraction to the podcast, and more people will actually come listen live and really participate in the show, and it gives another avenue for people to come really interact with the show.
I know we talked about it before in our individual meetings, but that's a huge point of interactivity now that we obviously didn't have with our audio podcast. Sorry, everyone. But
Of
we
course,
would,
there's the
right,
occasional Freudian slip.
That's actually the new podcast we're having. It's a podcast. We'll just Gus in the bathroom for an hour.
That'll be
Pretty
coming
gassy.
out,
Yeah, but before I would read journal entries with Gus, or we'd read comments on the podcast, and based on what people told us, we would adjust appropriately, whether it be technical issues, maybe this person didn't sound quite as good as they should have, or this microphone was kind of off, or subject material wise, like, hey, we like this, hey, we didn't like this, and we would retroactively kind of fix it after the episode. But now, in the middle of it, people have tweeted and they're like, hey, so-and-so's mic sounds a little iffy, or the stream's kind of buffering or something, and we can address the issue when it's happening. And even make it a part of the show sometimes. It's funny to watch people walk across the camera and go fix something and be like, oh, hey, what's up? But, that's a whole other thing that we really didn't have before, and we can improve on the spot. Also, they directly affect our material, like what we talk about. So we'll get a tweet and someone says, oh, why aren't you guys talking about this? And that creates a tangent. So it's a whole nother level of being able to reach out to our audience and actually have them be able to reach out to us. So.
And if you are live streaming and you find that your viewer numbers is low, please don't get discouraged. And I don't know if it's the same for you guys across the board, but we'll have about 15 people on our live stream, which is awesome. We're so excited about that. But we have thousands of downloads. So at least for us, the ratio between people who are there physically in the moment watching it live and the people who download it, there's a huge skew there. I don't know if you guys find the same thing.
Yeah, we have sometimes like 10, 12 listeners, maybe peak out at 20 sometimes. But we've had historically tens of thousands of downloads for one show.
Yeah. Our main poll still is downloads, and in comparison, it's obviously not the same number, but we started off low in what we wanted, but now we're back up to a pretty decent amount. So
The thing about doing a recorded show versus a live show is people tend to listen to podcasts while they're at work or while they're driving or while they're transportating from one place to another. And you have just that piece of the podcast really thriving right now. And the live stream aspect, there's some people that, depending on when you do it too, are there, they're willing to go on. But like for me, I work during you get the showing of the patch, so I have to download it later. So it's as far as live streaming goes, for any people that are new to podcasting or are thinking about doing a podcast, try to stay away from that a little bit. See where your podcast feels with the community that you're trying to get to, and then once you have an established fan base, once you have regular content putting out, then you can start investing time into doing live stream content.
And there are obviously variations of live streaming. You can do a live stream of audio, but especially if you're going to add a video to your element, it really is a different ballgame. When we put everyone on the set, they were obviously had to be aware of the camera placement. That's a whole thing they didn't think about before. So people are aware that they're being filmed, and it does put a little bit of added pressure, knowing that you not only have to sound good and keep the story going, but you have to make sure that everything looks okay. So and that can affect your actors and your performance. So it's a whole other thing to think about.
I'm try to skip through these as quickly as possible because we do want to do Q&A. So the next thing is kind of audio ambience, the sound that your podcast actually makes. There's a couple of big things that really go into this. One of them, which is kind of the room dynamic where you're doing your podcast. It's not; these aren't really big impacts to it, but there are little things that can really adversely affect the quality of your show if you're trying to really enhance your podcast. And that what?
I'm sorry, I'm just thinking about where we record in our living room.
I know.
And the best thing is that, I have an external mic on my MacBook Pro, and that's how I record my audio, and I have a cat who's really obnoxious. Nice. Go back and listen to the podcast, you can hear Simon.
Yeah, that's the next slide.
It's just the soundboard. Don't worry, everyone.
Yeah, totally the soundboard, not my cat. Or when they get into fights, or we did have one podcast where the cat actually vomited, so you can hear like, and you hear us going, oh no, So yeah, ambiance.
Yep.
Watch out for your background.
Yeah, so
I actually had one where I was, my wife was out of town, and normally I record in one of the spare bedrooms, to, kind of stay away and keep quiet. But she was out of town, so I'm like, okay, sweet. I can take it out to the living room, I can watch TV, the football game's on, this is gonna be great. There was a severe weather warning that night, and I actually had to stop the stream because the sirens outside my house were going off for the tornado sirens. And I'm like, okay guys, I have to go because my house might get blown away. Hopefully,
I remember that podcast.
I'll see you in an hour.
I'm glad you're still here.
It happens more often than I'd like. Oh, no, actually the worst was, so I said, hey, okay, well I'm gonna keep the stream going, and I'm just gonna, get my stuff ready to run down to the shelter if I need to. And so as soon as I get up, I kick out the power thing for my Switch, and so the whole thing goes dead. And so I got a couple
dynamic,
texts,
that's
and
where
they're
that
like,
falls, by the way.
are you all right? You still there? I'm like, no, I'm just an idiot. Just I'll see you guys next week. I swear. And it worked out, obviously, but yeah, it didn't take a tornado. It just took my foot.
So, kind of going off of that, room dynamic, kind of whether or not your room is echoey or not, depending on if you're maybe recording in the kitchen versus your bedroom, something that's insulated. A room with carpet is a lot better than a room with tile floor. Kind of those little things.
Reverberations and whatnot.
Exactly. Background noise, like roadblocks. I was going to go with Jonathan's example, but if you want to continue using the cat vomit, I will...
We're getting to soundboard, that's why I'm getting warmed up.
Oh, okay. Okay, we're getting to soundboard, yes. Voice clarity is one that's kind of hard to nail down. It depends a lot on the microphone that you're using, and depends on just kind of the techniques that you use for podcasting. And of course, the microphones like these, you speak straight down on top of, and there's other ones that you speak straight in front of. So it's knowing your equipment and knowing actually how to podcast, and there's plenty of resources on that. Audio assets, music. Usually intro music and outro music is a good flair. It gives a good, nice input and output to your podcast. But during the show, be very careful with what you do with sound effects and sound bites. 1 or 2 is typically okay. If you have a regular recurring segment that uses sound clips that you use to open, like I know on Major Notes from Radio, they usually have sound clips that they do for Xbox 101 and other segments that they do. those are fine, but once you start getting into the soundboards, heavily using those and having constant background noise, there's one podcast in particular, the Spartan Ops podcast. Sorry, Mitch, I did call you out. That they have a continuous loop of music in the background, which drove me nuts. So you need to use those very, very sparingly.
And that goes for intros too. I know there's some podcasts that have to have like a minute of music into their intro. That drives me nuts. I just turn it off. Like,
Yeah.
I don't
30
want to
seconds.
I completely agree.
You want about
15
30
seconds? I would go 15 seconds. If you're doing 30 seconds, at the 15 mark, you drop it down and it goes underneath the voice.
That's why it was better too when we moved to the live streams that we put at the end of the podcast, so we could actually do like full fan intros. For a while, I had to like cut the 15 seconds or 20 seconds. I was like, sorry guys, ugh, here it is. That's it. And with soundboards, I feel like, I don't know, if you rely on it too much, it almost becomes like the wacky morning DJ show where it's like, push the button, yeah, make a noise. But, yeah, it's like, oh, well, we came here to watch you and listen to you, not necessarily this pre-recorded thing. So,
Although when someone curses, you can always put in the little. We have the achievement when someone says something you're not supposed to.
Ray just goes, "Perk."
The next slide is regarding the recording hardware and software that you use. I'm going to have to go through these quickly. Sorry, you can get too much of a soapbox. But,
sorry, I can't go on to everyone about XLR connections and USB ports.
But there's two big differences between doing an internet broadcast and studio broadcast, and that's basically just in terms of the equipment that you use. So microphones, you usually have headsets, built-in microphones, USB microphones. Try to go with a decent headset or use a microphone. I know you use built-in microphones. I know Mac has good built-in microphones, but for everyone else looking to do a podcast, if you can forego using a built-in microphone, definitely invest in a headset.
I'm leaning towards an external mic too, sorry.
Yeah,
I
or an external microphone.
completely agree.
Yeah.
We have a guest who comes on regularly. His name
Sorry,
is,
Goose.
Talk Tony
I hate
Spencer.
you
He's a
all.
Grand State champion. He is awesome to listen to. He brings all his blustery wrestling heel stuff. It's great. He doesn't turn off the sounds on his MacBook. So every time someone makes a little comment, like we use the Skype chat to keep like comments private, like, oh hey, we're gonna wrap up in 5 minutes, blah blah blah. You can hear every single time a message pops or when the phone rings. And I was like, Tony, please turn it off. If you're listening,
just
Tony,
getting started,
if you're
internal
listening,
microphone
Tony,
is fine.
please mute your Skype sounds and please don't break me.
I will say if you're looking for a relatively cheap alternative to an external mic and you're worried about pricing, a Snowball is, you guys may have heard of it, it's a common microphone, it looks like Snowball, it's silver. But that's what Michael wrote and I recorded a lot of Internet Box episodes on before we started using a set of mics like these. So that's a pretty good alternative, you get pretty good sound quality.
If you have Rock Band, that USB mic is actually really good.
Just be
It
really
is pretty
careful,
decent, actually.
because if you don't talk directly into it up here, your sound goes to bad places.
It's actually not that bad because you have to stay close, so it kind of keeps it in your head. Jack actually used to use a headset, and it was fine because it sounded okay, but he never quite got the fact that you could hear him when he drank. So let's say he pours himself a drink, and so he's like, so the guest would say something and be like, oh yes, point I'm making, oh this is excellent and this is really informative. His response would be, no, yes, that was very interesting. I'm like, oh, Jesus Christ. So, like, when I started editing the podcast, I had to have a come to Jesus talk with Jack. I'm like, Jack, I love you. You are one of my favorite people. Here's stuff we need to avoid. And the drinking was one of them. I almost got him off ums and likes and okays. Almost.
Yeah.
I've almost made everyone actually plug their XLRs back in when they go to use the restroom in the live streams. There's been times when Gavin and Bernie come back, I'm like, oh, can you plug in your microphone, please, so I can adjust your levels? Thank you.
So, of course, if you do your research, you'll find most of the stuff that's up here. Different microphones, different mixers, different recording software. This is just kind of an overall list of types of software that you can find. Sorry, I skipped your part.
Internal mics are okay for
If
starting.
you have a question, I
Just saying.
GarageBand rocks.
Just
yeah.
don't type if you have an internal mic. That's a no-no.
God.
Yeah. Or if you have a second computer or a phone, use that instead.
Absolutely.
You can kind of sign the multiple places with Skype if you use Skype for your recording. Finishing touches, audio mixing and rendering. You can use GarageBand, you can use Audacity, you can use Soundbooth. There's few programs out there. Good, few of them are free. Some are professionally that you used to pay for. Audio files and formats, most of the things you're going to be working with is MP3s or M4As if you decide to do an enhanced podcast. ID3 tags and metadata is actually pretty big thing, especially if you're trying to get your podcast out there on the podcast crawlers and spiders. Make sure you have ID3 tags that actually inform people of what your content is. Make sure you have podcast art in your MP3 as well. That way, when people go and see it on their player, it's like, oh, that's the thing I'm listening to. It's a brand recognition thing, essentially.
I was just gonna say, since we were talking about audio quality as well, if you're looking for a program to, maybe if you guys are recording and you feel like the audio quality is not too great and you're looking for programs to kind of fix it afterwards, after the production, Soundtrack Pro is a really good noise reduction that you can do. You can set a sound print and then reduce it in the entire file. It sounds a lot cleaner. Also Audition, you can bring in your file into there if you have it. It has a really good declicker, and that's gotten rid of a lot of our mic pops that we've had, or any, again, when people pull apart their XLRs, you'll get a quick like, and that'll get rid of it.
I was just so happy. I did my first like workflow entirely in Audition a couple of weeks ago.
How'd it feel?
Well, I've been using Audacity, and Audacity's great, but I'm like, I kind of want a non-destructive editing, and I'm like, well, and I just paid for Creative Cloud, so I'm like, I want to use like more than just Photoshop when I have Creative Cloud because I can afford more of it. And so like I'm like, okay, I am going to use Audition next week. So like I kept putting it off, and I had kind of both of them running at the same time, and then finally a couple of weeks ago, I'm just like, screw it. Let's go. Let's do it live, and it actually worked out really well. So I'm happy.
One last thing on this, there's a shoutcast called 5 Reasons Why Your Podcast Technically Sucks. If you are a podcaster or you want to do a podcast, everyone needs to go see this shoutcast. There's a lot of good information regarding podcasting in terms of audio quality that really will help you get your podcast, and it helped me when I first started podcasting. Last slide before we take questions, so if you guys want to start lining up, we will be taking questions. As we have about 15 minutes. Publishing your podcast, where you're going to publish it, whether you want to establish a website, or if you want to use a free blog software like WordPress.com or Blogspot. Any of those blogs you can use, and they have hosting sometimes that comes with them. You can also look into doing something like Libsyn, which is a monthly subscription for a certain allocated space. Libsyn is a very good service. We used to use it, I think.
That's what we use to have all
You
our
use it
podcasts
well?
too. Yeah.
Yep.
And then we'll just embed the links into our website.
Yeah. And there's some hosting platforms out there that give you unlimited space of storage, so you can use that as well if you decide to actually go with a self-hosted website. Subscription methods, whether you want it to be on iTunes or the Zoom Marketplace or other podcast crawlers. Most people, what they do is they submit it to the iTunes store, and most other podcast crawlers will pick it up automatically. iTunes is probably the biggest podcast fetcher of all the services out there.
We did Zoom once. It took 6 months for our podcast to get on there.
Yeah, we just
Ours
recently
never
did that with
worked on
Internet
Zoom.
Works.
Like I have a friend who was like, hey, you should totally get your podcast on Zoom. I'm like, okay, cool, we'll do that. And I don't know how many times I submitted the feed, and it never went through. I was just like, okay, we're gonna stick with this other one.
Yeah, I feel like iTunes is really good and receptive about incorporating a lot of new podcasts, because I know I've had friends who started, especially with Internet Box coming out and Rooster Teeth, they're like, oh, let's start it, because my friends hang out and they talk about the same things that you guys do. But they already are being hosted on iTunes, and they've only had like 10, 15 episodes or something, and they don't have that great of an audience in comparison to what we do, but iTunes is all for it.
Yeah, it's really easy, like same day kind of thing.
Mhm.
And they update. Like, we did not want to lose, when we did our name change from Late Night Jenga Jam to Flipchart, we didn't want to have to make people resubscribe, because asking people to subscribe and click that one button is already more than we can ask of you, and we really appreciate when we do that. So to ask them to do it again, it was like, we really don't want to do that. So they actually updated within a few hours. The art, the name, everything just updated and went through. I'm like, okay, this is going to be a lot easier than I thought it was going to be.
Yep. All right, so that pretty much wraps up for all the slides that we had. If anyone has any questions and answers, go ahead and line up. We have about 15 minutes. I'm not sure how quick they're going to kick us out, because this is the last panel, but go ahead and start lining up.
I want to answer the question from the guy with the grip on plushie. I hope it's for me. The grip on plushie, that is.
Well, it's actually just kind of a general question, but maybe I'm betting Lindsay will probably be best at, since she said she's tech. I'm looking at microphones right now.
Oh, yeah.
So I have a Yeti right now that I've been using for other stuff.
Nice. I know, I was going to say, you just
That's what I
Justin.
use. Yep. Yep. Yeah, I really like the Yeti, but I'm looking at the AT2050 because that's what Gus uses. I was wondering, has that changed at all? And do you know what Achievement Editor uses for their mics?
They use the same thing, actually. We moved over for the live streams too. We use the Sennheisers that are more, they're a little more directional, but they also pick up more room tone than our previous mics. So I think, honestly, the better quality is what you have going on right now. That's the best quality that I've found, I think. And that's what we actually started using Internet Box right now too, once we moved on from the snowballs. And that's what I've been using so far, and I like it a lot. I haven't varied from it, so I would stick with it.
Okay, so you're saying either the Yeti or the AT?
AT21, sorry.
Okay.
I was like, yeah,
Okay.
sorry, I should have clarified.
Okay.
I have not used it yet, but
Okay, thank you very much.
no problem.
I have a question about analytics.
Yeah.
Do you guys have any tips, especially through services like iTunes, a way to track that data of who's actually listening?
Our hosting is still done off TalkShoe. Like, even though we don't use the service to actually produce the podcast anymore, they have been really good about hosting our MP3s as long as it doesn't get like crazy big. And if it does, we just split it up. And there's a lot of really easy reporting tools, at least on that site. I'm sure that you could probably pull that data from iTunes somewhere. I just don't know.
I think for iTunes, they don't really do the statistical tracking as you can get with a lot of more website analytics. So if you go with a self-hosted website, like if you do DreamHost or HostGator, they have onboard analytics for your site, and they will actually track the downloads, usually on a day-by-day basis. If you use something like Libsyn, they have their own.
I was just gonna say, Libsyn does have a tracking,
Yeah,
that's what we use.
Libsyn has its own tracking API as well. So it's going to be wherever you host your podcast. It's not going to be iTunes that you're going to be relying on. It's going to be the hosting service for your actual audio download.
G'day. Just two quick questions. One, what's a really good, effective way of marketing a podcast or getting it out there? And also, what's another good way of getting good feedback from other podcasters and more professional podcasters, I guess?
Well, one way to get really good feedback is to listen to other podcasts.
Yep.
And find out, oh my God, I hate it when they do that. Or that's really annoying. Or, hey, that's a really good idea. That's
Yep.
what we've done a lot. We've listened to the RT podcast a lot. It's really interesting that RT podcast, exists, and all of a sudden the Griffball Hubcast exists. And then the RT podcast starts doing live streams, and then the Griffball Hubcast starts doing live
Are you
streams.
stalking?
So, there's nothing wrong
And then I came
with.
in late to the game, apparently.
Yeah, you copied us. We copied them.
Hey, we did one a long
I'm
time
just saying.
ago.
We've been live streaming since the beginning. No, the thing was, it's like with TalkShoe, it was really awesome because it was a live method before a lot of other live methods. And so in the moment, it's great because you can call in and talk to someone. Like I know we had an episode when we had Bernie on, and the site was having horrible issues. This was like 2007, 2009, and so this was the forum that he used to come out and address the audience, and it was a watershed episode. And one of the reasons why it worked so well was because all you needed was a telephone. The problem is that listening to an episode later on, it's a phone call. So listening to a phone call for an hour is tedious, and you only really do it if you really, really like what you're listening to. So we found that making the audio quality a lot better and trying to keep, solve the puzzle of how do we still continue to do it live, because it was never really an option to do just record and then put it out. We always want to be live. And no, because like you said, it's a really great way. A lot of times if we call someone out, they'll call into the Skype. Because a lot of them are our friends, so we'll be, oh yeah, that Izzy, she's a real jerk. Izzy's calling, oh crap.
Busted.
Did that answer your question, or I think you had something else a little bit different?
Kinda.
I was
Yeah,
gonna
okay.
say, too, it is
Go ahead
difficult to
first.
form a talk about it and a lot of community to get together and say like, how do you guys feel about the podcast, or have you listened to us? Because a lot of times it's difficult to reach out, but there is a community, especially like if you are fans of the RT page or you're on the RT page, a lot of feedback can come through there, because I know that in the RT community, a lot of people are inclined to go watch content that are created by other fans and people just like them. So that's where I've seen a lot of people talking about, again, like that's how I knew Dustin and Goose Check and Roblox. I was like, oh sweet, like you're also on the RT community page, and let me go check out your stuff. But also the biggest thing that I learned, and I'm sure this is very obvious, is listening back to your podcast again, over and over again. And you can obviously pick out things that tech-wise you're not too happy about, or like if you're anal retentive like me, you're like, oh, this one sound was awful. Why? But yeah, and then you can also kind of get a feel for your group dynamic too, and kind of work on like, oh, which castmates work best together? What subject material did people seem to be cool talking about or felt comfortable with, and what seemed to not really, what fell flat, basically.
Okay, so continuous self-improvement.
Yeah, exactly.
And do self-improvement and reaching out to other communities. Definitely find the right forums to do it and the right places to do it is something that's kind of milestone in promoting your work.
Yeah,
Finding
that's one
people
of your
that'll be-
questions was about promotion, right?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, that,
Sure.
and marketing, yeah.
Marketing.
Yeah. It's mostly just getting the word out to other people that are within a similar bubble of information that you're really trying to go for.
What kind of podcasting are you interested in doing? Like, what kind of topic would you be interested in?
Oh, I do 2 podcasts at the moment. I'm just trying to think of how to promote them more. So like we've got Twitter, we've got a Facebook, we've got a web page. So I do 1 comedy podcast and 1 Rooted community podcast. So the Rooted,
Okay.
Rooted, so the Australian community podcast, and just trying to promote those things. Just trying, I guess, build the listener base, and what else can I do to grow those communities and nurture them, I guess.
It's on Ruti if you decided to talk about Gripball, even for
Yeah.
just like 2 minutes.
So, yeah.
And
You're networking right now.
sent
There
me
we
a
go.
message saying, hey, Goose Checker, we're talking about Gripball for 2 minutes. I can guarantee you that I would at least retweet that. I might even write a post about it.
Especially if you're with Rooty, I didn't realize that, and I know obviously Rooty's work. But yeah, especially in the Roost Youth community, people will absolutely recognize, oh, Rooty, I know this, and they'll
Okay.
go check out your stuff.
So
And of course-
if everyone helps everyone, then
Yeah.
it continues to grow.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly.
And of course, Facebook, Twitter, do the social media
Yes,
stuff. If you have that
and
down,
especially again with Rooty, I don't know if you tweeted RT podcast in the middle of it, like absolutely you should be like, yo, I also do this podcast, check it out, and people see it.
Okay, cool. Thank you very much.
No problem.
Or helpers.
So, my friends and I have been trying to do stuff as far as podcasting is concerned, but a lot of the time we'll end up going into it like, okay, so let's do it. Let's talk about Halo, and let's keep it Halo oriented. And 15 minutes into it, we'll end up, yeah, so Chewbacca's great, A problem that we have is that we go off on mad tangents for seemingly no reason, and I can't really keep it on course. So I was
Do you
kind
want
of
to talk
wondering.
about the
Yeah,
podcast you were not on a couple weeks ago?
from me?
No,
Or
Kelly.
tell us
Oh, Lord. So
I'm gonna let her tell the story first, and I'm gonna add on top of that.
I was at Disneyland, and so therefore I was not on my podcast. And usually there's one person on the podcast who's like the ringmaster who kind of corrals all the crazy tangents and keeps people on track. I'm that person. I crack that web so when I'm gone, it goes badly. And so we had the crew on, and Duststorm came was a guest on my podcast while I was gone. And I listened to the podcast, I'm like, oh my god, this is awesome. You would not shut up about like the most inane little tiny
That was not me,
thing
by
from
the
Halo.
way. That was the other.
No, it wasn't. But that's one thing. When you're trying to keep people on task, you need to have something. I mean, I always think of Gus like this for the RT one.
I was just gonna say, that's Gus and Bernie on RT.
You don't necessarily have to be the angry person, although when my people go off topic and I'm like, keep trying to redirect them, just keep at it. Like if that's you and your job, and you just kind of keep redirecting them, if you want them to stay within the Halo sphere and then kind of go a little too far out, feel free to crack the whip and bring them back. I mean, literally something I was waiting as, okay, so back to Gripball, or back to what we were actually talking about, that's totally okay, especially if the people you're on are being very obtuse and stubborn.
Yeah, I was gonna say, it does feel like, you do feel like a dick when you're like, okay guys, seriously, let's get back to this, but yeah, I mean, even people find that funny sometimes when you're like, shut the fuck up. Okay, back to what we were talking
No
about.
one cares, let's move on.
Yeah, enough.
It also
Wait.
helps
keep
when you
going.
have when you have your finger on the button and you can just disconnect them. That helps. That's a level of authority that you can't buy.
It also, going along with the ringleader too, if you have a person in charge, which I highly recommend, it's usually good to have one person who has a set agenda and is okay with telling everyone that they need to move on. But what also really helps, especially it sounds like in your case, I would absolutely lay out what subject material you're going to speak about each episode, and then just brief everybody beforehand. We'll do that with Internet Box. I mean, and we're like the most sporadic people ever, but we'll still beforehand be like, okay, we need to touch on this, this, and this. As long as we get this talked about, we can talk about whatever else. But,
Yeah, we're almost the exact same way, even though we are more Gripball topical. I'll have a sheet with me that says, okay, we need to talk about these 4 things. If nothing else in the next 60 minutes, these 4 things need to get across.
And it's not something that you want to necessarily kill the mood. Sometimes depending on the length of it, you just want to say, okay, guys, wrap this up. But there are times where you have to say, okay, stop, we're moving on.
Yeah.
And again, like they said, don't be afraid to be mean about it. If you have to move on, if there's,
Well,
like
you
I
don't have
said,
to, you don't have to be mean,
No.
but you can be Gus-like and make fun of people who are if they're frown, and you can see them start frowning at them. But yeah, it'd totally be okay to just kind of make a joke about it and go, okay, seriously, we're getting back to what we were talking about. But if you want a totally sporadic podcast, goes from Halo to Star Wars, that's not that really big of a,
no, big cap.
and everybody loves Star Wars.
Chewbacca loves Halo.
Fuck
Right.
God, get a camper.
We have about 5
Legitimate
minutes, so
strategy.
Did that answer your question?
There was one other thing that I kind of wanted to mention a little bit is you guys kind of talked about like throwing names out there, But to that end, we tried to record this one time, and my friend Robert would not stop talking about, like, not necessarily talking, but quoting Rooster Teeth. We recorded for 45 minutes, and about 36 of that was him quoting Rooster Teeth.
I would say that's an example of a bad tangent. When your entire content is from another podcast.
Well, like, there was the Rooster Speak community recently opened up their server to a bunch of new people. Like, hey, we're going to welcome this new group of new users, and they're going to get to talk to these established, Rooster Speak people on it's like a TeamSpeak server.
Yeah.
And like, I stopped in there, like, it was like the second night it was live, and it was nothing but tease it and no way in, no way out. Literally for hours, very loudly. And I'm like, it was great because, well, it was great for them because they got to have fun. But it was awesome because the server has different rooms. So it's like, okay, I'm gonna hang with the new people. Okay, I'm done hanging with the new people. On to the League of Legends room or whatever. So that really helped. But yes, that can be a problem.
I would not invite that person back. Like unless it's like your mom or somebody, if that's all they're gonna do and they don't take your feedback about, hey, we really need to kind of more of our own content. If they can't hear that kind of constructive criticism, I wouldn't invite them back. Because this is my podcast, this is my baby, this is my time, my effort, my work. God, the editing. If you're not gonna do what I ask you to do within kind of the very squishy rules that we have, if you can break our rules, you're not coming back on the podcast. That means you are way outside the box.
I love the phrase "squishy rules." That one. That was awesome.
All right. Okay.
All right, thanks a lot.
Thanks. Okay, shotgun round. We have about 4 minutes left.
Lightning round.
Okay. My question has to do probably more towards Lindsay, because the RT podcast does go on YouTube. And my question is, would YouTube for like a video podcast be a good way to start out a podcast? I know the Creatures do it, and I know a couple others.
Yeah, I was just gonna say the Creatures is the best example I can think of people that house on YouTube. The only times that we've had streams on our YouTube channel so far is when we were filming Immersion in Atlanta, and we have one more, and for the life of me I cannot think of it. I'm almost positive. Yeah, I was like RTX, obviously. Sorry, duh. But I think it was right. E3. I'm pretty sure when we had the announcement for Xbox One is when we also hosted on YouTube. But other than that, we actually have hosted through our site individually, and we use a program called Wirecast, which you can have on your computer, and it automatically streams through whatever hosting site that you deem. So we just went ahead and had it pull through our site directly. Before we used to do Twitch, but you can't do embedded podcasts, which is why we stopped. And obviously that's a big pull for Rooster Teeth, is that we have our M4As have embedded links and you can click on them. And of course with our sponsorships now, it'd be nice for people to visit the websites of our sponsors. So yeah, that's how we do it. I would say starting out, it might not be the best idea, because especially with YouTube, there's just so much going on in YouTube. And even with live streaming on YouTube, I've seen that there's just like people live streaming in their bedroom for whatever reason. Why not? But yeah, I would say maybe try going on something like Twitch
Are
first.
you sure that was a podcast?
Yeah, right? I ended up on chat roulette, my bad.
that was a different kind of broadcast.
That was chat roulette.
All right. Thanks for the question.
Thank you.
Thanks, guys. Great panel. Just had a quick question. You talked about live streaming of video. Is there a camera that you recommend for live streaming?
I was gonna say
That's more than Lindsay, sorry.
I was gonna say we use Sony Handycams. they're not crazy awesome. The most expensive camera that we use is the Red One for the green screen shot, which you can absolutely tell the video quality is completely different. But that's so that we can key during the stream. We need that camera to do so. But we have a perfectly fine stream. Just use it's one of those bad boys, like right there, boosh. But yeah, we still have a perfectly fine stream, and it's not like the greatest of video quality, but since it's streaming capable, and we're again able to maneuver them so quickly, we have floor managers that can quickly and easily lift them. If you try to move the Red One in the middle of the podcast, good fucking luck. But, yeah.
Okay, thank you very much.
We got time for 2 more.
By two, he means everybody else in line.
Unless you
Go
guys
really
like-
fast.
We'll go really fast.
The answer is
The
yes.
Joel question lightning round.
Okay, lightning round.
This is for anyone to answer on personal experience. What is the worst technical difficulty you've had to deal with?
Oh man.
Other people's mics.
Joel's voice.
Like, you can have someone who calls in and you're really interested. Like, there's a couple of musicians that I absolutely love, but whenever they call in, they're always calling on their phone and they're always like in the car or walking around. And I'm just like, I love you, but stop. So, or people who are using, their laptop mics, and it's a really, really crappy laptop mic. That's the biggest one.
I would say audio quality, background noise is one of the biggest offenders in my
You
book.
have someone who's really close to their mic.
Or we can wait.
And we have a person that's called the Darth Vader.
Thank you. No problem.
Thank you.
Sweet Megan Lara shirt, by the way. Yeah.
Oh, thank you.
I'm a nerd and I know that artist. Go ahead and ask your question.
There you go.
Oh, so for the what really intimidates me about starting a podcast is the duration, like the time duration. Like their strategic podcast is 2 hours, but my friend runs a podcast and it's like 30 to 45 minutes. So what would you say is like the recommended minimum time you could say?
I would say, so I actually did a survey for our podcast to see how long people want the podcast to be, and the average consensus was about 60 to 90 minutes is what people were really looking for in the podcast. I know for the Rooster Teeth podcast, you've had podcasts from an hour, from podcasts of 2.5
I was gonna say,
hours.
we started in an hour and it became an hour 15 minutes, became an hour and a half, it became 2 hours.
A good target range, I think, for most people is an hour to an hour and a half.
And people are a lot more forgiving about going over time on podcasts, especially because they go in with the understanding that it's going to be a lengthy discussion, and it's mostly talking based, so they're going to be there for a while. Whereas YouTube videos, after 2 or 3 minutes, people peace out. So I'd say it's pretty good. It's okay to extend it a little bit longer, or if you feel like you're going longer, probably not.
The only thing I would add to that is that how much content do you have? Because if you've got 30 minutes of content and you stretch it on for an hour, that's awful. Like
Yeah,
that's the
don't-
worst thing you can do. For
Don't
me, that
force
is.
filler. Don't force filler on a podcast.
If you're done talking at 30 minutes because you're out of stuff that you guys wanted to talk about, then cut it at 30 minutes. If you have to take 5 hours like Dusty's ones do, then you take 5 hours. But yeah, just don't.
That was only twice. It was twice.
Oh my
Yeah,
God.
keep it
One of them
natural.
was with Bernie.
Like, there's some guys who did a panel earlier. They're called Bottomless Wit. Their podcast is widely varied in length, and they actually have everything from like about an hour to 15-minute movie reviews about stuff on Netflix. So it's just whatever works is really. But yeah, if you want a solid number, yeah, I would say 45 minutes, 45 minutes an hour.
Yeah, 45 minutes to an hour is probably like the most common one. But yeah, don't stretch out something if it's not there.
Right.
Yeah.
No problem.
Don't be afraid to cut, edit.
Hi guys.
Howdy.
Hi. Okay, so I'm actually a part of an all-girl gaming team, and we Twitch and we do all that stuff. And unfortunately, we get a lot of the obsessively positive for us being females, or obsessively negative for us being females online. And yeah, I was just wondering like how, because as of now, there's 17 of us, and we just kind of like joke around about it, and like we don't get butthurt when people.
You have
tell us-
17 podcasters?
No, there's 17 like.
Yeah, I thought the same thing too.
Okay,
I was like,
okay.
No,
Just need to clarify that there.
Yeah,
It's like
so
the board
we-
mega panel.
So we're actually thinking about doing podcasting for both League of Legends and for Counter-Strike, because those are 2 of our like main games. But we were just wondering how to like effectively like get over that, it just not being like babes on the computer. because
Am
We
I allowed to
don't
curse
want
on
to.
Yes.
Twitter?
I just said fuck.
I would say, fuck them. Like literally, there is nothing you can do to control them. If they're in the chat box causing problems, have a mod in there. Like if they start saying the R word or stuff that's just inappropriate, kick them out, ban them, like Instagon. I mean, as a female gamer, I feel your pain.
Yeah,
And
don't be nice.
to be a girl
Don't drop
on,
until your balls drop.
well, I'm sorry.
Sorry.
I got some nasty comments for that one. But I'll-
You're going to have people that are going to come by and really just kind of rack on your show.
Yeah.
Like, a lot of the time, you just really have to push through some of that negative feedback and really focus on the people that really care about your show. And if it becomes an issue, you get other people that are part of your show, you get them in like, hey, we really appreciate what these guys do, stop giving them a hard time about it.
Yeah, I would say too, also, one thing to focus on is especially like, I don't feel like I'm a woman who's podcasting. I feel like I'm Lindsay who's running a podcast. And I think it's important to focus on that. And you're like, listen, I'm doing something I love. I'm putting out content that I enjoy. Yeah, you're just like, well, sorry.
Yeah, of course
Well,
they are.
yeah, unfortunately, it's the internet. People are going to leave negative comments about everything. And I've seen plenty where it's like, who's this C word working the podcast? But you know, I'm like, that's fine. I make my content. If you don't like it, then that's fine.
And I just want to say it's incredibly brave. I mean, for a lot of the ladies out there, I don't know how many guys can really. I mean, I'm sure guys can
I'm sure it's the
understand
same
in
for
some way.
many dudes that have had the same problem. Like
Yeah.
Michael's been called several stupid things online when he first started Internet Box and
Right.
Rooster Teeth.
But I mean, just to put yourself out there like that, I mean, I know the Fragdolls do it with their streaming
They're
thing and stuff
awesome.
like
They're
that.
so
And they take a lot of shit for
We're
that.
all
Oh, you're a girl,
actually
you know,
all
you
of
don't
us.
actually play, you know, all that kind of stuff. Fuck them. You know what? You're out there, you're doing what you love, and if people can't realize that, then they're not worth your time. They really aren't.
Okay, awesome, thanks so much, Heather.
We've gotten the note to cut off, so unfortunately.
Just two more.
Let's pick-
All right, go,
we do two
go.
more, or do we
One
have-
more.
Two
Okay,
more.
we're allowed two more.
Last one. What's the best way to maintain flow in a podcast? Like,
Alcohol.
I'm gonna say the professional answer is having a good host that will dictate the flow of the show and make sure people stay on topic, making sure those bad tangents don't happen too often.
Thank you,
Yeah,
Justin.
definitely a good host.
That was the professional answer.
Okay,
Yeah.
last question.
Yes, great.
Great lightning round. Last question. It's all on you. No pressure. Do it. Hi.
All right, currently, I record a podcast sometimes using Skype, and I use CallGraph for it. Is there anything kind of better? Because I like it because it separates the caller and the callees in different channels, which makes editing a lot easier. But is there anything better that you could suggest
So
for Skype recording?
I use a program called MP3 Skype Recorder. It is free. It has your track and the Skype, all the guests on a separate track. So you do have those separate tracks. It records joint stereo, 128 kilobits per second. So it's decent quality. It's not like the best like studio quality that you're gonna get, but it's in my opinion a lot better than CallGraph.
Okay. And for those reasons, I don't use Skype to record. Sorry, I was like,
Thank you.
no problem.
All right.
Woo!
Thank you guys. I'll definitely forward any questions that you guys have, so come up and grab a card.
I have no idea where you're going.
Why, I do.
No, it's a complete mystery.